content warning for anyone who doesn't like thinking about the inevitable. I would suggest that anyone with a crippling anxiety disorder click off of the video. Just know that I get it, I care about you, and no matter what it feels like sometimes, everything is going to be okay. I've got a bunch of other stuff for you to watch, so why don't you go give that a try? As for the rest of you, I just have one thing to say. Don't panic. All of you are going to die one day. The Earth is going to explode, and there's nothing any of you can do about it. Would you like to play some Scrabble? Hello everyone, it is Tuesday, I am Tuesday, and today I'd like to inform you that the Earth has, regretfully, been demolished to make way for a hyperspace highway, at least by the 4th chapter or so. I know that some of you may be upset by this fact, but I will remind you that the time to file your grievances has passed. Anybody living in the local stellar cluster has had the past 50 years to process this complaint surrounding Earth's demolition in the local galactic planning department on Alpha Centauri. Making a fuss about it after the fact is little more than an exercise in futility. Oh, for the activistically inclined members of the audience, I would like to assure you that those still on the Earth at the time of its demolition were vaporized in the most humane yet cost-effective way possible given the level of technology available to the group overseeing said demolition. There's an unmistakable edge of menace that undercuts the majority of the guide. It begins as early as the story's 2nd page and doesn't really get resolved until the final pages of the 2nd novel. Despite the moment-by-moment hijinks present throughout the story, one can't help but wonder at the futility of it all while looking at the story as a whole. As previously mentioned, the Earth dies as the opening of the series, and the 5th book ends with every book in all possible realities being destroyed simultaneously. With that in mind, you might expect this through line of unstoppable destruction to put a damper on anyone who decides to look past the curtain of comedy this whole mess is covered in, and you'd be correct. Much like life, this series can be quite gloomy when looked at in its totality, and much of what it means to examine this series necessarily involves an attempt to examine our own microscopic place in the universe. You see, this entire series is capital A absurd, i.e. in a philosophical sense, on top of being absurd in a comedic way like how most people would be accustomed to. In other words, the series postulates that life has no inherent meaning, and we, in our reading, can take that one step further. It is in fact the denial of this cosmic meaninglessness that leads us to suffer as we struggle to comprehend a reality that is, by nature, incomprehensible. According to the guide, it is only by accepting the meaninglessness of our reality, by coming to terms with the fact that we cannot know, that we will be able to lead a meaningful and fulfilling existence. I'm getting ahead of myself though. We'll circle back to that idea, but first I need to talk about a book and an answer. So, if you haven't picked up on it already, today we're going to be talking about The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Welcome to Bookshelf A to Z. It's hard for the human mind to comprehend the scale our universe exists on because of how big everything is. Take a look. Behind me is an image composite created from data collected by the James Webb Space Telescope of a galaxy cluster over 4.6 billion light-years away. It contains over 1,000 galaxies, includes traces of 13 billion-year-old stars, and takes up less space in our night sky than a grain of sand would if held at arm's length. You are not evolutionarily equipped to be able to envision the types of numbers I'm talking about here. Your brain just shuts down when presented with them to the point that I might as well be speaking another language. If I told you the James Webb Space Telescope had picked up 137 Mondalian fluval dwarfs packed into the space the size of a schmalmadink, it would make about as much sense to you and me on a base level as the actual numbers do. With that in mind, how do we go about answering any of this? Well, let's scale it back a little bit. Still to a stupid and incomprehensible scale, but relatively less stupid and incomprehensible than the gobbledygook I was just spitting. According to the guide, that wonderful repository of knowledge and wisdom that, quote,
has many omissions and contains much that is apocryphal or at least wildly inaccurate.
20-some-odd million years ago, in a parallel universe nearly indistinguishable from our own, the second strongest supercomputer to ever exist was constructed, and its creators asked it thus: what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? This penultimate machine god couldn't answer right away. It needed 10 million years to think about things first. So, its creators waited, building their entire civilization around the fated day in which the answer would be revealed. The answer, much to everyone's shock and dismay, was the number 42. Now, before you go asking, there could be no doubt about the legitimacy of the answer, okay? This computer could answer any question, after all, so the obvious next step was creating a computer that could come up with the question to life, the universe, and everything. It would be a question so grand, so encompassing and direct, that it would make the answer of 42 make sense to anyone who asked it. Thus, the biological supercomputer called the Earth was created in order to find this enigmatic question, much to the shock and horror of most of the galaxy's therapists' unions, only to be blown up a handful of minutes before completing its grand computation. Despite this, or perhaps in spite of this, the entry discussing the Earth in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reads as follows: mostly harmless. Any external harm the Earth is capable of comes in the form of the number 42, a nonsense number with no apparent meaning, which has been referenced, repackaged, and hidden away in more places than anyone would be sane enough to count, both diegetically and in our wider cultural landscape. A great deal of the first two novels are occupied by characters trying to finish this grand computation, using and proposing an array of wacky and occasionally unethical methods of trying to extract the question to life, the universe, and everything from the brain of poor Arthur Dent, only to have the uselessness of such an endeavor be shown via a game of Scrabble. That's not a joke, though I did write it to work as a callback, so there is that. Arthur uses a game of Scrabble at the end of the second novel to prove the meaninglessness of existence, and then briefly goes insane because of it, and then he finds peace, at least internally, via a sense of acceptance and contentment and all that. He realizes he will likely have a hard life ahead of him, seeing as how he is trapped on Earth 2 million years in our past, but as far as we can tell, he's okay with this. He has to be, because he throws the guide away. Think of it like this. Arthur lives in a chaotic reality that cannot be fully quantified. Planets blow up. Planets get terraformed by solar explosions. You can watch the end of the universe over cocktails, and the ruler of the galaxy cannot fundamentally prove anything exists outside of his own thoughts. What use would the guide be, anyway? As a result of this, Arthur realizes sometimes it's best to just knuckle down and find your own way, instead of deluding yourself into thinking you can know. This is a point we keep coming back to throughout the series. All of these characters have an inability to make sense of the wider universe around them, so a great deal of the drama and the insights into their lives come from how they learn to stumble through this darkness. Take the fourth and fifth books as an example, in broader strokes. So long and thanks for all the fish has the Earth returned, and Arthur returns to it. He finds the love of his life in the form of Fenchurch, plans to get married or travel the stars with her, only to have her disappear in a freak hyperspace accident off-screen before the beginning of the fifth novel. Arthur then learns that he is the donor Trillian ended up using in order to have a kid, thus making him the father of Trillian's daughter, named Random. They all play house for a little while before returning to Earth, only to realize they arrived on the day of Earth's demolition, in all realities, and cannot escape the fate that was prescribed to them had they not been Miyazaki'd by a pair of spacefaring vagabonds. So, what does any of this mean? Here's a quote for you, describing Arthur's final moments.
Through the new strangeness of noise and light, he could just make out the shape of Ford Prefect sitting back and laughing wildly. A tremendous feeling of peace came over him. He knew that at last, for once and forever, it was now all finally over.
As we can see, there's nothing to be done. There is no sense in trying to find a reason. Just as Albert Camus, the father of absurdism, died in a freak car crash on a straight stretch of road, a stretch of road no one would reasonably die on, so too do Arthur and his compatriots die after seeking refuge in the one and only place Arthur Dent could die. A dour end, to be sure. Is that a fucking bug on my light? Bruh. A dour end, to be sure. One that hasn't sat right with me in the 12 years since I first read this series, if I'm being completely honest. It's an ending that I hate, but I still think we should examine why Arthur is happy. Arthur's life, kinda sucks when you look at it. He seems to be one of reality's punching bags. Whether it be the destruction of his home and planet, or the mice calling him useless enough to vivisect his brain, or any of the interactions with Beeblebrox, or his soulmate disappearing presumed dead, or his daughter calling him a boring loser, or an insurance company calling him unimportant enough to send a search party, Arthur always seems to be on the tail end of somebody else's joke. He bumbles through life thinking he has things figured out, only to be corrected of any such notions at every possible opportunity. In other words, he is an everyman who, despite the mind-bending and fantastical things happening around him, is caught in a rote existence. He wakes up every morning wondering what it all means and has yet to ever find an answer come bedtime. It's important to understand this about him because he is you. Quite intentionally so. And what's most sickening to me about this association is the fact that an answer has been dangled in front of Arthur's nose. An answer that nobody is capable of understanding. An answer that is functionally meaningless. Sound familiar? Entire civilizations have been built around the number 42 and what it could possibly mean. Countless people's lives have been dedicated to it in one way or another. Some chase it with a dogged persistence, while others couldn't be bothered with the thing. At least 2 people forsake it for their own economic and social benefit, while even more attempt to suppress it in order to protect their bottom line. But while everybody gets what 42 could be, nobody really knows what it is. And they can't, because it's incomprehensible. Arthur, on a base level, knows this. The 2 times we see him at peace in the series are the 2 times when he accepts this, and then takes whatever meaning he can from that acceptance. He knows that you and I don't have the privilege of knowing, but instead of having this cause a cosmic and existential fear, it is in fact a liberation. He looks upon the universe and knows that it is meaningless. Nothing in the breadth of creation matters, which means that everything from the smallest blade of grass to the largest galaxy cluster collision matters equally the same. In a world where nothing matters, everything is the most important thing. What beauty can we derive from this position? What freedom does that provide us to forge our own destinies, huh? We must remember that he throws the guide away, and in so doing, he sets himself free. Why? Because at the end of it all, Arthur knows something that we do not. He knows what the question is. I'm sorry to keep doing this to you. It's become a running thing in these videos, but I've intentionally obfuscated a key point in the series. Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect figure out what the question to life, the universe, and everything is on page 306. You ready for it? Click away if you're not, okay? Alright. What do you get if you multiply 6 by 9? 42. It doesn't make sense. We can't make it make sense, and all of us really, really want to make it make sense. Therein lies the issue. Six out of 10. If you read through this thing and crave narrative closure, listen to the final episode of the Mostly Harmless radio broadcast. Believe me, it'll save you 12 years of narrative distress.